everyone. We're going to just wait for a minute while everybody arrives into the room. I'll be letting people in from the waiting room for up to a minute, and then we'll get started. You may want to check that you have the speaker view on, and we'll go to gallery view at the end. Hopefully you can see either myself, Anna Ganley, or Dr. Richard Pyle, and we'll get started shortly. Okay.
I need to apologise, by the way, if we are interrupted at any point by a large and stupid dog. He keeps barging his way into my study, and he weighs 40 kilograms, so it's hard to say no to him. He comes in, he bashes me just down here, and then he turns around really awkwardly because he's much too big, and then wanders out again. And no matter what I try to do, I can't stop him doing it.
We look forward to that.
He won't do it now I've mentioned it.
Okay, a few more people coming in, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we're good to start. Okay, welcome everybody. Hello, and this is our first event of 2021. I'm Anna Ganley, and I'm Head of Staff at the Society of Authors. As we're in another lockdown and in the depths of winter, we're very glad that SOA member Dr. Richard Pyle has kindly offered to lead us with this interactive session about well-being for authors. I'm hoping that you're going to bring us some light and inspiration today. The session will last for 45 minutes, and Richard will talk about how we can all get the best out of our sleep, nutrition, movement, relaxation, and connection with others. A few housekeeping points from me before I hand over to Richard. Please do stay in listen-only mode for the main bit of the talk, and then we can also join in at the end with a Q&A session. But to make presentation interactive, if you do have any questions as we go through, type them into the chat box, and I'll pick those up with Richard as we go. And also, if you experience any technical issues, these often can be resolved by exiting and re-entering the room, and also by checking your device's audio and video settings. I'll be in the background once I've handed over to Richard, so if you have any technical queries, feel free to message me or to the group as one. So, Dr. Richard Pyle is a GP who specialises in cardiology and lifestyle medicine. He's a board member of Hearts Valley's Clinical Commissioning Group, and he's the clinical GP lead for Thrive. He's also co-founder of livinglifebetter.uk and author of Fit for Purpose, which is about well-being with a particular emphasis on meaning and purpose in life. And that's due for publication by Harper Inspire this April 2021, so coming out soon. Richard has worked for the NHS for over 20 years, and he's seen a lot of change during that time. But what we'll be talking about today is his passion for how we can truly feel well, and he's very passionate about helping others to achieve this as well. So you can find Richard on Twitter at Dr. Richard Pyle, and his website is livinglifebetter.uk. So Richard, welcome. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Anna. Yeah, thank you for asking. It's one of those things that I try to start all my meetings with, is asking people how they are, because these are challenging times, aren't they?
Definitely,
yeah.
I'm the same.
Yeah, so thank you for your kind introduction. I don't think I need to say a lot more, other than to just give you a bit more, I suppose, personal detail. As Anna's mentioned, I'm a GP. I've been a GP for 20 years. I'm currently sitting at home in my study with my, well, not with but my wife and kids are out there, and my large and stupid dog. I became aware of the Society of Authors when I thought I'd better join the Society of Authors, because Harper Inspire very kindly offered to publish my book. So then when I started to look at the website and get the messages and the emails, I realised, what a tough time authors, and obviously lots of other people in society, are having as well. And I thought, it would be nice to be able to contribute in some way. And well-being is a topic that's become very important to me over the years. The reason for that is although I've been a doctor for a long, you think all doctors would be really knowledgeable about well-being, wouldn't you? You think that's kind of what a doctor's job is, but actually it's very easy as a doctor to get sucked into all the other things that you're meant to do, like ticking boxes and prescribing pills and doing admin. And also over the years, I've seen a lot of people come to me who've got significant concerns about their life and their well-being, but the medical model isn't fit for purpose. So if someone comes in because they're depressed, because they are out of work, or because their relationships are suffering, or because they haven't got a roof over their heads, what do we end up doing as doctors? Well, we end up, we try our best to help, but sometimes that ends up just giving people pills. And that's a bit of a sticking plaster approach. It doesn't address the real reason for why they're here. So I became interested in wellbeing a few years back, probably triggered by my oldest son, Luke. Luke is 23, and he's got a very severe complex epilepsy and a moderate learning disability as well. And he doesn't live with us now. He lives in a lovely place just an hour's drive from us. But for 18 years, we looked after him 24 hours a day, and it was pretty intense. I won't bore you with the details, but it was hard work, and we did it because we're his parents and we loved him. But it was full on, and I recognised the need to look after myself and my family a bit better, and that got me started on this journey, thinking about, well, actually, how am I sleeping? What am I eating? How physically active am I? You know, what's my mental health like? What are my connections like with other people? What's it all about? Why am I here? What's the big questions? So that's what I try to do a bit more with my patients nowadays. That's what I do with some of the clients that I work with. And I thought that I'd start today just by breaking it down, looking briefly, not boringly, no PowerPoint, at a few key areas that most people seem to really appreciate the opportunity to talk about. So I would suggest that could include sleep, movement, stress and relaxation, and connecting with other people. And certainly in my brief conversation with Anna, she suggested that those things might be relevant. But I don't want it to be too lectury. So if you can fire your questions onto the chat, Anna has very generously agreed to interrupt me at any point to ask me questions. I'm also not intending to talk at you for 45 minutes. That will be very tedious and I'll probably run out of voice. Leave at least 10-15 minutes at the end for just a chat and an open question and answer session. So if you think of something now, but it isn't perhaps directly related to what I happen to be waffling on about, then you are welcome to interrupt through Anna, but also we should hopefully have time to talk at the end as well. So if we started off with thinking briefly about well-being, there's a lot more to well-being than what you might think of as health. In fact, we know that health probably makes up for about 20% of what determines how well we feel in life, and the rest are our environment, our relationships, our finances, our work, our purpose, our meaning, our education, all those sorts of things. And so it's important to consider those things in the realm when we're thinking about health. And lots of those things actually have a much bigger effect on people's health than you might imagine, and doctors actually maybe aren't as important as we think we are, which it risks me talking myself out of a job. There you go. So one of the things that I talk to people about particularly is sleep. I'll recommend a book by another author, Why We Sleep, by Professor Matthew Walker. Absolutely brilliant. He's also interviewed by Rangan Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee does the Feel Better Live More podcast. I'm getting a few nods from you. He's done a 2-episode interview with him a couple of years ago, which has now been put into one. And I think actually he's being interviewed again by Rangan, and either has been or will be in the next few months. Great book, and underlines the importance of sleep. So I don't know about you, but I hadn't realised just how important sleep was to my well-being. It's the bedrock of our health, the tide on which all boats float. And I realised that I was a sleep masochist. I used to say, I'll get all the sleep I need when I'm dead. That was my approach. And I hear lots of people who say that. But in fact, the reality is that we all need sleep. We spend a third of our lives unconscious, semi-paralysed, defenceless. So either that is a huge evolutionary cock-up or a really important part of what enables us to survive. And the fact there are almost, I think, 7 billion of us on the planet suggests maybe it's the latter. We know people need 7 to 8 hours sleep a night on average. what's interesting is that we all like to think we don't need as much sleep, in the way that we all think we are above average drivers. And there are people you can quote, Maggie Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, Winston Churchill, who all survived on very few hours sleep. I think some, if not all of those people also suffered from dementia. So it's just worth considering whether that's necessarily an admirable thing. So I recommend people try to get 7 or 8 hours sleep. And my top tips for sleep include having a really good routine, because our body clock is 24 hours roughly. In fact, if you put someone in a cave deep underground with no light, no communication with the outside world, no idea what time of day it is, their body still knows roughly a 24-hour circadian rhythm. So I recommend that people get a good routine, and try to go to bed at roughly the same time, try to wake up at roughly the same time. None of this depriving yourself of sleep all week and then having a massive line at weekends. You end up with a bit of jet lag when you do that. And also I found as a writer that having a good routine really set me in a good place. So I'd get up about earlier than I used to, make myself a cup of tea or coffee, sit in front of the computer, stretch my legs, start to write. And having that as part of your writing routine with a regular getting up and going to bedtime can be quite helpful. Other things we recommend, I don't know how many of you are big coffee drinkers. Raise your hands if you're a big coffee drinker. Getting shakes. We've got some big coffee drinkers here. So there we go. Anna's got her coffee. This is just water for the record, not gin. It's not 3 o'clock yet. So we know that caffeine has a half-life of 6 hours. So if you have a cup of coffee at 12, you've got half of it in your system at 6, you've got a quarter in your system at midnight. And if you're sensitive to the action of caffeine, that could really disrupt your sleep. Caffeine is an adenosine receptor blocker, so it stops the rising sleep pressure that you're meant to feel as the day goes on. You disrupt that by drinking caffeine, and then you crash when the caffeine wears off. So that's one of my top tips for getting better sleep. Another thing is physical activity. I'll talk more about that in a minute, but we know that moving, ideally in the morning as well, when you're getting lots of exposure to sunlight, is also really good for anchoring your body rhythm. Although actually higher intensity activity later on at the end of the day is not so good for you. It may, in fact, make it harder for you to get to sleep. So if you do like your exercise, try and do it a bit earlier on. And the other big thing I recommend about sleep is light. These various devices that we've all got, they emit blue-white light, and blue-white light lowers your levels of melatonin, which is an important chemical which helps you to start to get to sleep. And so I recommend people have their phones off for an hour or two before they want to be asleep, if they can. Big screens don't seem to do it as much. I'm watching television and doesn't seem to do it for me, but little screens seem to, maybe the type of frequency of the light. So I recommend you don't have your phone in your room. You can put on things like night mode, where it changes the frequency of the light, but it's a bit of a fudge. And the other good reason to turn one of these things off as well is that it's you giving yourself permission to wind down at the end of the day. If you are staring at your screen, doom scrolling, which is easy to do in the times of COVID, you're waking your brain up and you're creating levels of anxiety. You might still be in work mode because you're checking your emails, and before you know it, you're going down the rabbit hole of Twitter or Instagram or whatever. So I recommend that as a top tip for sleeping. And ideally have a cool, dark bedroom. I know not everyone lives in a nice big house with lots of rooms, but if you can have your bedroom as a place that you sleep in and don't use as an office and a home cinema, then psychologically that's quite helpful for helping you to get into the right mode. And sometimes some people find having a bath before bedtime can be helpful too, because as you get out of the bath and your temperature drops, it gives a message to your brain that it's time to go to sleep. So those are a few sleep things. I won't dwell for too long because obviously there are other topics to cover. Anna, do we have any sleep questions at this stage?
Well, we don't have sleep questions. We've got some questions coming in. So if you want to take those now, we can take them all. But they're I'll run through them for you. We've got some questions from members who'd like to know about issues of success and how that affects well-being. And Katrina, if you wanted to come online to say a bit more about that. We also have questions further down about counteracting the pressures of feeling guilty, of decreased productivity. So for people who like to keep to a plan, whether that's a 1, 3 or 5 year plan, and during this time we can't really keep to those plans as we would have done in the past. So how that affects our health, and those who are dependent on herbal sleep pills to get to sleep. So there is a sleep question or a comment, and the third part of that is planning in uncertain times. Any tips on how we can do that? So
okay, well, I'll tell you what, a couple of those I've made a note of we could try and cover when I talk about relaxation. Maybe save one or two others for the end, but I'll touch on the sleep thing, the herbal remedies. It's an interesting one. First of all, there's not a lot of evidence that herbal remedies are powerful sedatives. If we address the sedative issue generally, sedatives are exactly that. They're sedative, but they're not restorative. So when patients come to me and say, can I have something to help me sleep, doc? Although I will issue pills for people in an acute crisis, let's say, for example, someone who's just been bereaved or got a very stressful situation that's going to be short-lived and over in a few days. Of course, we're not inhuman, so that can be helpful. But actually, they're not restorative. They disrupt the quality of your sleep. And without going into boring technical detail, you can see objective data of that, the effect of alcohol and sleeping tablets on how restored you are by your sleep. So I tend to decline to prescribe sleeping pills and say to people, look, even if you think going to sleep with a drink helps, even if you think taking a herbal remedy helps, actually overall your sleep quality is probably impaired and you don't recover as well overnight. So it's better to think about the more natural approaches, all the best sleep hygiene, which I've mentioned a few things of, but if you look on the NHS website, there's stuff there about sleep hygiene. So I recommend that people try not to be dependent on pills if they can. And if you think you are dependent on a herbal remedy, maybe just very gradually reduce. Because you need to remember that just because it grows on a bush or gets sold to you by Holland and Barrett doesn't mean that it isn't potentially dangerous or addictive.
Okay, we do have another sleep question, and I know I either struggle to sleep or sleep an awful lot. But here we have a question. As a menopausal woman, I feel a victim of my hormones, especially with the lack of sleep. I already do a lot of the things you advise, but how much, but not with much luck. Any ideas about what we can do about this?
Yes, well, that's a whole extra layer of complexity, isn't it? So we know there are many reasons that we don't sleep very well, and it would be unkind of me and unfair of me to say the only reasons that we don't sleep well is because we've got crap sleep hygiene and we spend all our time watching Netflix on our phones. That might be the reason. But clearly people don't sleep well because they might be suffering from depression or other mental health concerns. And this is perhaps not the forum for that today, but that is clearly something important that you should talk to your doctor about if you think that's relevant. And they might have other health conditions, including problems with the menopause. And clearly there are symptoms that come with that, again, without going into excruciating detail, which are going to result in your sleep probably being disrupted. I would say you should really be chatting to at least your GP about that in terms of approaches to your menopausal symptoms. There are natural approaches. The evidence for them is a little bit variable. There is a recipe online that I've seen for HRT cake, which has got all sorts of interesting seeds in it. I don't know if it's even still there. It was there a few years ago. Things like black cohosh and various other bits and pieces. So you might want to consider that as well, but I'm not going to pretend that I'm a menopause and sleep expert.
Certainly found that listening to meditation recordings at night have helped me recently during this time, because I'm a long time sufferer of insomnia, and listening to meditation recordings.
Absolutely. So I could briefly go on to that. So I was going to talk about that in the relaxation bit, but mindfulness meditation is really helpful for a lot of people. It's an ancient art. It's thousands of years old. It doesn't really matter whether you're religious or not religious. It's practiced in lots of different ways. And if I was to put it very simply, mindfulness is really, it's about being present in the moment and learning to sit with that, to not be distracted by your thoughts, to accept that there are distractions in life, to acknowledge them. You don't have to empty your mind. Which in fact freaks some people out with mindfulness. They say, I tried it, I couldn't empty my mind, so I didn't do it again. But it's about learning, often starting with simple things like breathing exercises and sitting in a quiet place, to be present and in the moment and learn not to be distracted, and focusing on things like physical sensations, etc. And through those techniques, which are skills, and you do have to acquire them and practice them, it's not a magic bullet. You can't, read a book on it and suddenly be a mindfulness expert. There is good evidence in the medical literature that mindfulness does all sorts of things. It's been shown to change your bits of your brain in terms of brain volume. It's been shown to change levels of inflammatory chemicals in your body. It's been shown to be good for depression. And it can be helpful for sleep as well, as you've mentioned, Anna. A lot of people, when they try mindfulness, just end up falling asleep. So that works well. And in fact, there are specific exercises you can do that are more catered towards going to sleep. And for example, on the Headspace app, which is designed by a guy called Andy Puddicombe, who's an ex-Buddhist monk, there is a module on sleep. So I heartily recommend that.
How do you feel about afternoon siestas as a way of catching up on any sleep that you might have lost the night before?
Controversial. So my view is, and again, everyone's different and you may have medical conditions that I'm unaware of, but my view is that afternoon siestas for younger people without significant health issues are probably not so good, because it reduces the sleep pressure. And so you can find it harder to get to sleep at the end of the day. As you get older, sleep quality and quantity is harder to obtain. Obviously, I'm looking at the faces here on the call, and everyone here is clearly young and glamorous. But as you do get a bit older, sleep is harder to obtain. And you do often see older people having a nap in the middle of the day, and it's a bit hard to say to them, "Wake up! Don't do that." And in parts of the world, I will acknowledge culturally, a siesta is what they do. And in fact, Matt Walker writes in his book that when we lose an hour's sleep because of the clocks changing, there is an increased incidence of heart attacks across Europe. But I would take the view, maybe a power nap, but probably not anything more than that, because it's going to make it harder for you to get to sleep. Should we move on to a different topic? Or have we got more sleep questions?
And I will share all of the recommendations in a follow-up email afterwards, because there are recommendations coming up there about Headspace launching on Netflix and other apps. So I'll circulate those apps.
Calm is good as well. Let's talk about movement for a bit, because I've been doing some work with some companies, supporting them in their well-being and talking to my patients as well. And people find it really difficult. If you're working from home, which obviously a lot of us are, and I would imagine most authors are, if not everyone, you don't have the natural bits in your day that would previously have meant you were moving about. So you're not commuting to work, you're not walking out to meet friends and have a coffee, etc. And of course, I know what it's like to be sitting there kind of in the zone, typing away, almost a bit afraid to break the spell or whatever. But the fact is that we're actually made to move. Our natural state is in motion. And I think that as a society over the decades, hundreds of years, I guess, we've kind of moved against our nature. So we've made a world for ourselves which is unnatural. And I reckon that we could probably all sympathize with this. If you were sitting here in your chair, as I'm doing now, and you sit still for long enough, eventually you start to get uncomfortable. You start to get a bit restless, you stretch, you move around, because you're not meant to be sedentary. But the nature of our world, particularly in a developed country like ours, where there's lots of industries which aren't as physical as they used to be, is that we've become sedentary. So I recommend that people try and put as much movement into their day as they can, and people might like to share their tips. But simple stuff like, once upon a time I would have said, get off the bus a stop earlier, walk instead of the tube. That's obviously not quite so relevant for most people at the moment. But if you have a little gadget that you wear, you could have something remind you if you've not moved for half an hour. If you drink lots of fluid, well, that's good for your kidneys anyway, and then inevitably you have to get up and go to the toilet more frequently, so that's good. And let's face it, when you've been staring at a screen for a certain length of time, you probably need a break anyway. If you're fortunate enough to have stairs in your house, get up and down those. You can do lots of mini workouts at home. You don't need a gym subscription, you don't need Lycra, you don't need to consider yourself super fit. What's really interesting about movement is that the greatest benefit occurs in people who go from being sedentary to just mildly active. You get 30 or 40% of the reduction in mortality and disease just by that first step, literally that first step in some people's cases. Whereas the more and more you exercise, you get a law of diminishing returns. So if people want to be fell runners and ultra endurance marathon types, that's fine. But you probably aren't going to live all that much longer than somebody who just walks briskly for 20 or 30 minutes a day. And I'm sorry if that upsets anyone, but the data suggests that. It's like a drug. Like any drug, there's a dose response curve and it drops off as you get higher. So simple stuff is fine. And if everybody just did the simple stuff, we'd all be much healthier as a nation. I mean, you can do little workouts. So I don't know whether any of you have tried HIIT, high intensity interval training. I'm getting some nods here. One or two people going, oh, yes, I tried that once. So there is some evidence that doing higher intensity exercise, you probably don't need to do as much as the 150 minutes a week of moderate. And you can do that on the spot in a little room. You know, you can do jogging on the spot, star jumps, thrusts, lunges, press ups, sit ups. And again, you can modify the activities that you really hate. So simple stuff like that is good. And if you're the sort of person whose boat is floated by being able to look at your wrist at the end of the day and see how many steps you've done, then fine. But it's more the moderate activity. It's the stuff that makes your heart rate go up, makes you feel a bit warm and breathless. It's probably better you do 5,000 steps of that a day than you do 10,000 steps of sort of steadily walking along. So those are the sorts of things that I recommend when it comes to movement. And recognizing
I love that we've got someone who's doing star jumps as you speak, just to keep warm.
Well, there you go. There you go. So the thing I come back to is it's emphasizing to people that we're made to move. Our natural state's in motion. We need to restore movement to our lives as best we can. And if you are in a profession which requires you to be sedentary for quite a lot of the time, then it's just putting in those little movement breaks throughout the day. And the evidence shows that people who work in an office, for example, who have a sedentary job all day long, the ones that take breaks during the day, walk up and down the stairs, go to the loo, go for a walk at lunchtime, walk to have a meeting with someone. I know meetings face to face, I know that's not a thing we do at the moment, but they do as well, if not better, than the people who sit still all day and then try to blast it all off at the gym at the end of the day. So as a friend of mine once said, you can't outrun a sedentary lifestyle. So it's just worth thinking about keeping on the go. Anyone got any questions you'd like to ask about movement?
We're all sharing what we do on a semi-regular basis. So we've got swimming in the sea, which sounds very cold but glorious, and doing things, just house-based things as well. And people are setting kitchen timers on their
kitchen timer. I've seen the chat. Yeah, that's great.
So different ways to keep moving, and to remember to keep moving, because it's easy to get into whatever you're working on, and then a few hours goes by very easily.
Yeah, and Joe Wicks has started up again, hasn't he?
Yes.
Just when I was thinking we'd seen the last of him, he's back again. So
my kids weren't interested. It was just me and my husband doing the Joe Wicks, and the kids have wandered off to do something else. Yeah.
So I probably won't bore you with any more than that, other than to say that there is lots of excellent evidence. If you want to look online, there's a video called 23.5 hours, and it's on YouTube. I think it's Mike Evans is the guy who does it. And there's a 5-minute version, which is fine. And it's a lovely video. It's a little hand on a whiteboard drawing stuff. And it talks about the benefits of health, and it looks at the reductions in long-term illness, disease, death, cancer, depression, recovery from surgery, all of these things from this miracle drug that is movement. So I heartily recommend that. Should we talk about relaxation and mental health a bit? Because you've touched on a couple of those things. I'm actually going to just go to a little cheat sheet that I've got to make sure that I'm giving you my best advice in a second.
I hopefully have also shared that YouTube video about 23.5 hours. So hopefully it's the right one.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, no, if that's the name you've put in, that should be fine. Okay, so let me go back to video here. So let's talk about stress. 20 years ago, it was a bit naff to talk about stress. People who came in and wanted to be signed off ill, were a bit embarrassed about having the word stress on their certificate. As a doctor, we tried to find up a different word to use instead. But in fact, then it became a much more accepted term. I think we would all accept we have stress in our lives. And the world has just conducted a massive experiment on itself in the last, 12 months, hasn't it really, where we've just raised our baseline of stress significantly across the world. And people who've never had health stress-related issues are beginning to experience them for the first time. Young people with palpitations and a bit of IBS and tremors and anxiety, who don't even recognise what it is. You've got people who've had mild levels of anxiety, mental health issues, that have become, moderate or worse. Interestingly, some of the people with the most severe symptoms actually have said to me, do you know what, I've been living in lockdown for the last 15 years. Now the rest of the world understands how I feel. So I'm not playing down people's mental health getting worse in lockdown, but I think we've seen a surge at the lower end, particularly. And the thing about stress is it's always been with us. It's actually really important. You need a bit of stress in your life because if you're running away from a large toothed and fanged predator, you needed to be able to respond to that. If you were jumping on a bus in the days we all ran and got on buses, or meeting that deadline for your publisher, you need a little bit of stress. You need that fight or flight response, that your heart pounding, the adrenaline and the steroids racing around your body. Nothing wrong with that. And it's like Goldilocks. You need just the right amount, not too much, not too little. But the problem is that when you have a chronic stress response, and by chronic, I'm using it in the medical sense of the word, as in long term. When some people go, oh, I've got a chronic headache, doctor, they just mean it's really bad. But I mean enduring and carrying on. And the problem with that prolonged inflammatory response is that it may contribute, well, it does contribute to a number of long-term consequences of that, not just mental health concerns, but also physical as well. Things like heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, cancer, dementia. You can even measure levels of inflammatory markers in the body that go up when you're stressed. So the important thing to think about is how we can manage it, because it's helpful in the short term, but harmful in the long term. So one of the things that I really recommend people think about is how we could take back a bit of control in our lives. So I wouldn't imagine, I might be underestimating, but I wouldn't imagine there's anyone in this room who can influence the outcome of the COVID pandemic, for example, or government policy on immunisations. So try not to spend too much time worrying about things that are beyond your locus of control. I tell my wife this all the time. She ignores me, as all experts get ignored by their loved ones. A prophet is without honour in their own town. But anyway, try to not think about things that are out of your control, because that's just a waste of your energy. And try to think and focus on the things that are in your control. You can do physical things. So I used to think that in order to relax, you had to change your mindset, and then your behavior would change as a result. But that can be difficult if you're feeling stressed to the eyeballs. How do you do that? But in fact, what's really interesting is neuroscience tells us it's the other way around. So if you start to behave and do things differently physically, it can then improve your mental state as well. And without wishing to get super sciencey, we've got the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight bit that gets your adrenaline and the steroids racing around your body. The parasympathetic nervous system is the bit that puts the brakes on and slows it down. And what can you do to control that? Breathing is really good. So if you practice just sitting here now, the trick is to take a reasonably quick deep breath in, and then a slow prolonged exhale. So people describe it in all different ways: box breathing, 3-4-5 breathing. I just do in on the count of 3, out on the count of 6 is how I tend to do it, or just remember to breathe out for longer than I breathe in. What that does is physically that causes your heart rate to drop, your breathing slows down. If you've ever tried this whilst you're walking, I'm a very quick walker, but if I start doing that whilst I'm walking, I find myself slowing down. My body's going, you don't need to go as fast. And just that simple physical act can start to break that cycle, that spiral, to help you to feel more relaxed. And that's why mindfulness is helpful. And we've talked about mindfulness, so I won't go back into that, but that is essentially part of the physical techniques of mindfulness. And then there are other things when it comes to relaxation and managing stress. So it's about having connections with other people who can support you. Really important. I know some of our connections have to be virtual at the moment, but even that's better than nothing. It's about having perspective. So remembering that, a year from now, are we all going to be obsessing over COVID and whether we've had our jabs or not? Hopefully not. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. It's about the other things I've mentioned. So the physical activity is one of the best things you can do for mental health concerns. It's at least as good as pills for a lot of people, as is eating a diet. Well, if you eat a Mediterranean diet with lots of fruit and particularly vegetables, for people with moderate to severe depression who are already being treated for depression, the SMILES trial by Dr. Felice Jacka showed that you only needed to treat 4 people with a Mediterranean diet for one of them to recover from depression. Well, drug companies would kill for that performance from their drugs that we prescribe by the bucket load. So that's another thing to remember. And also, again, just trying to get outside and connect with nature. The Japanese call it forest bathing. The idea that it roots you and gives you a perspective, because you look up at the sky and you see there's more going on in life than your immediate worries as well. So that's a bit of a high-speed whip through that, and I'm aware we've only got 10 minutes left, but I'm happy to take questions about this and any other topics now, if you'd like to.
Well, one question coming about your environment is, what's your opinion on reducing furniture in the house and spending more time being grounded on the floor, whether that's sleeping, doing work from the floor, and incorporating movement into a daily routine? Are there any hidden issues that we need to be aware of to switching to that kind of lifestyle?
Well, that is interesting, isn't it? Decluttering, if I was to use a very broad term, or minimalism, is very popular. And I think that applies to both digital minimalism, which is what we haven't talked about when it comes to anxiety, but I probably won't labour that point, as I think I've kind of made it. That really helps people when it comes to things like turning off your notifications and turning your smartphone into a dumb phone. And I would argue, if anything, that might be more important than, how many chairs you've got in your house. But yes, the decluttering idea, and there are various famous people, aren't there, who've written lots of books on it and preach about it. It is a sensible one. It is getting rid of stuff in your life that you don't need. And I think there's that link between physical clutter and mental clutter. And in our house, we are trying very, very gradually, very gradually to declutter as our kids get older and we don't need all the paraphernalia we used to have. So I think as long as, there's no physical reason why you should be sitting in a chair. The chair, you could argue, actually is one of the worst inventions ever, because it transformed us from being beings who were sedentary or squatting, for example, to spending all our time sitting or lying down. So if you want to get rid of a few chairs in your house, go for it. And maybe just to be mindful of any back conditions you might have or mobility issues. He says, putting in some disclaimers.
Another question about sleep, but also about the creative life, is that, and if you have any tips or had any experiences of it, because a lot of people will find that they're most creative when they should be sleeping, but late at night the ideas come to them, sometimes at the most inappropriate times. What's your view or take on that to help any creatives who also find that they're most creative when they should be sleeping and so may not want?
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? I'll give you a little personal anecdote. I once woke up in the middle of the night with an entire story in my head. I got up, I got a piece of A4, and leaning on the toilet seat in our ensuite bathroom, I scribbled the entire thing down and put it in a cupboard, and it still hasn't seen the light of day. It's not the book that's getting published, although it is maybe on the list. So I do appreciate that we are all different, and there is this concept of larks and owls. So the idea that some people are at their best in the later on in the day, and some people are at their best early in the morning. So the owls are the night people, are the larks in the morning. I will start by saying I think that's largely a myth, in that most people who even think that they're an owl, if they actually change their life and start being a lark, they do better. Now, I know there'll be some people in this room who feel that doesn't apply to them, and I respect that. But I used to think I was an owl. I used to think I did my best work at 11 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the morning, and actually going to bed at a sensible time and getting up earlier in the morning completely changed my approach and my ability to write. But I guess you have to respect that, don't you? It's not up to me to tell you when you should go to bed, if that's the time when you come up with great ideas. But I would challenge you. Most people by the end of the day are getting a little tired, and however good you think your productivity is, it would probably be even better if you'd had a good night's sleep. And for example, with things like memory, when it comes to cognitive function and exams, if you have a bad night's sleep, you can forget 30 or 40% of what you've learnt the day before, or what you've even learnt 2 or 3 days before. So I would argue that if sleep has that effect on memory and cognition, which can be demonstrated, then might that apply to your creativity as well?
Lots on sleep, and I do. This chimes with me. This is from Laura, who lives in Scotland, where the seasonal difference in daylight hours is quite big, and she's sensitive to that. So in winter, she sleeps a lot longer than in the summer. Is that okay to sleep longer? I know certainly all I can do at the moment is sleep, and waking up later, certainly because we can, because we're at home. But should we be keeping to the same hours throughout the year rather than changing with the seasons?
I think the problem is when we interfere with stuff too much, isn't it? So I think letting us do what our bodies feel the need to do naturally, you're probably never going to go far wrong. Professor Walker asked in his book, he asked 2 questions. He says, do you feel tired when you get woken up in the morning? And do you get woken up by your alarm? And if the answer to either of those questions is yes, then you're not getting enough sleep. So if we're talking to someone, if Laura finds that she wakes naturally, she says naturally wakes up at 5. And then later on in the winter, it's a different time. If your lifestyle will permit that, then who am I to judge? But I know when I've started to sleep better, because I don't always practice what I preach. You'll be shocked and appalled to hear. I sometimes drink alcohol in the evenings before I go to bed, and sometimes I stay up late. I know it's shocking. I know if I then do a few days really good sleep, I start waking up before the alarm. And every time I say to myself, oh, you know this stuff, you write a book on it, you tell people about it, why do you put yourself through it? So yeah, that's fine by me. Here we go.
I'm conscious as well of the time, so if people do have questions they want to ask, do put them into the chat box. And if it's easier to explain your question, and if it hasn't been answered, do feel free to unmute and we can discuss it more widely.
If there are lots of more questions, we could just take a minute or 2 to talk about purpose and meaning, if you like, because this is quite a hot topic, and indeed it's one of the things that I focus on in my book. So as a doctor, I'm used to seeing people who come into the surgery, sit in front of me and dissolve into tears and say, I don't understand it. I've got a lovely spouse, 3 beautiful children, a great job, big house, smartest road in St Albans, and why do I feel so bloody dreadful? And a lot of it comes down, I think, to meaning and purpose in our lives. And I think whether we realize it or not, as human beings, we spend a lot of time asking ourselves that question. If you might be familiar with something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm getting a few nods here. So it starts off with the idea there are some basic needs we have in life. At the bottom of the pyramid, at the base, you've got food and shelter and relationships and sex and everything else. And then it goes up to the top of the hierarchy of needs. And it got modified a few decades ago to include transcendence and self-actualization. So being all that you can be and helping other people. And you could argue that unless you have those bits in your life, you may never get to the top of the pyramid. Now, maybe you don't need to get to the top of the pyramid, but purpose and meaning, I think, are underrated. And there's a Japanese concept of ikigai, which those of you who read Dr. Rongan's books or listen to his podcast will also be familiar with. He didn't invent it, but he certainly mentions it. And ikigai means reason for being. And the trick is, and this is very relevant when you're thinking about your career, is, what do I love in life? What am I good at? What does the world need? And what can I get paid for? Now, that's quite a simplistic interpretation of ikigai. It's quite career orientated, but we haven't got more time today. So when it comes to your work, whether you're a full-time author or it's something you do as well as another job or whatever, or you've got 7 strings to your bow, I think it's important to think about what you've got in your life that fulfills you. You may find that the work that you don't get paid for is actually the thing that you find most fulfilling, but the thing that you do get paid for is what keeps the roof over your head. The thing that you're passionate about, you haven't yet achieved or you need to work on. So I encourage people to have, give themselves a sit down and have a think. Just take that time to think, what's it all about? Because, as they say, if you do what you love in life, then you never work a day in your life. We've got top tips about yoga. Very good. And the notebook, absolutely. Sarah Jane Lewis talks about the notebook. The trendy word nowadays is journaling, which apparently is quite an American thing. I had disagreement with Harper Inspire about this. I put in the word journaling into my book. They said no one will understand what that is. Say diary. I said everyone knows what journaling is now. Diary is like when you plan when you're going to have a meeting. Anyway, we had to disagree. So journaling is good, and there are loads of journaling apps. I use one called Day One, which is really good. And there's a version that on my Apple Watch, so you might see me running along, suddenly going, pressing a button and trying to speak into the phone whilst I'm running, which is a recipe for disaster and ending up in A&E. Any more?
I'm going to follow up with the Ikigai quadrant that you mentioned in the emails, just so that people have that. I was scribbling it down, but I'm sure I'll find something nice and simple that I can.
Yeah, if you type into Google Images, there are 1,000,001 pictures to look at, and there are quite a few books written on it.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions?
Yes, Fiona Alexander, I argued for journaling. I'm hoping that stayed in there. I'm the first timer, so I'm a little bit nervous about how these things work. I don't want to really upset anyone.
One thing that I found really useful during all of last year, and we're still using it, is the Marco Polo app, because it's at first it's just another way of keeping in touch, but instead of typing messages to people, your friends and family, it's just a video app. So we just record quick daily check-ins to the group, and it's a nice way to see and hear from people, so you feel like you're having a conversation without the commitment to respond straight away. You can just pick up on it.
That's nice.
Mainly because my friend's in New Zealand, and so the time differences don't work actual conversations, but having a video journaling app is quite useful, and has built up quite an archive of conversations, and they've commented that they found that quite useful as a different way of journaling their life.
I've made a note of that. I hadn't heard of Marco Polo. That sounds good. In fact, I think my interactions with some of my family members would be vastly improved if they were not done real life face to face, and we could just send each other messages. I wouldn't be in the mess I'm in now if I managed that.
I think it's quite nice because we get bombarded so much with information coming from all, like, text messages, WhatsApp messages, emails, and it's just quite nice to have the live connection of someone having a chat with you.
Yeah. And these things scream for our attention, don't they? So I will challenge my wife over this. I'm painting her as a terrible person. She's not. She's really very lovely, but she has issues about social media. And we'll be sitting on the couch watching, Cardinal or something, and her phone will go off, and she will actually, she doesn't do it as much now, but she will often pick it up and have a look at it and then reply to the message. To which I would say to her, "Sorry, was that the ambulance service calling you just to to ask you for immediate emergency? It was urgent. It was urgent." So and being able to switch off, and which is why turning off notifications, oh my goodness, it was a blessed relief for me. It drives my colleagues mad because I don't respond to their messages anymore, but it's been a win as far as I'm concerned. I'm not going back. Yeah.
We've got a lot of comments about overthinking, overanalyzing, and not doing that for the sake of our mental health. It's a good thing.
Absolutely. It's that's what the mindfulness can be helpful with, because you recognize that you're doing it, and you just give yourself a little, not even a telling off, you just acknowledge that you're doing it, and then maybe you move on to thinking about something else.
With an eye on the time, I'm coming back because it's after 12:15 now. So unless there are any other questions that haven't been answered, or anything else you wanted to add, Richard, what I can do is I'll do my closing bit, and then I'll leave the session open in case anybody has any questions they might want to ask individually to Richard.
Sure.
So I could do that if that would be helpful for the final 5 minutes. So it's just to say thank you for doing this for us as a fellow member of the Society of Authors. It's been really useful just to share tips and resources, reminders of things that I think often we know what we should be doing, but it's easy just to be so focused on what you need to do for the next deadline or to get paid that you forget about what's actually good for you. So thank you for those reminders. That's been really useful. The messages that I had really is just that our spring program, which we ran all of last year, it doesn't start until February this year, just to give us a bit of time to plan that in. And so we'll be sending out an emailing to all members about that soon, but that will be from February. But you can still catch up on all of our events from last year on our Vimeo channel. And we do have a few in January. The next one is on the 26th of January, and that's where you can meet the Harper North team and find out what they're looking for in 2021. And that's hosted by our Authors North group, and they're talking to Genevieve Pegg, who's the publishing director there, and Alice Murphy-Pyle. And so she's the head of marketing at Harper North. So that's the next event coming up, and they're all on our website at societyofauthors.org/events if you want to sign up to any of those. And if you're interested in this type of event, there are 3 or 4 that we ran last year that are still available to watch again. We had one, and Ignati's actually in the audience today, Holistic Health at Home. with Ignatius Dykov, how to work well at home with Matthew Knight, and how to have a bit of time to rethink and reset your career with, and that was with the professional career coach Mary Fenwick. So there are a few events on there that you can look back and watch again if it inspired you to watch more. But that's the official kind of sign off for me, and just say thanks again to Richard for sparing us the time today and to chatting to us about how we can live life better and with more purpose. So good luck